Assume this cargo ship arrives 3 days late. The container is still cold. The food has not spoiled. The supermarket shelves remain completely full, but the system has already started paying the price. Dubai imports over 90% of its food. That is roughly 9 million tons every single year. This massive volume arrives from more than 180 different countries. That number sounds like the ultimate safety net. But what happens if hundreds of different suppliers still rely on the same ocean routes, the same fuel, and the same cold storage networks? Today, we will put this logistics machine through 3 strict stress tests. We will simulate a delayed vessel, a choked maritime route, and a scenario with multiple simultaneous shocks. The central question is not whether Dubai has enough money to buy food. The question is exactly how much time that money can buy. Let us follow the journey of a single refrigerated container. If you look at a map of Dubai food imports, you see lines connecting to over 180 nations. It paints a picture of absolute, unmatched global reach. But if you switch to a map of global shipping lanes, a different reality emerges. Those hundreds of origin points begin to merge. They funnel into a handful of shared maritime corridors, shared refueling hubs, and shared choke points. This is the detail that changed my view on that 180 number. At first glance, extreme diversity looks like the perfect answer. But when you trace the physical paths across the ocean, that diversity turns into a serious question. Diversifying your buying locations is not the same as diversifying the physical path to Dubai. Many different flags can still be delayed by the exact same storm or the exact same blocked strait. The convergence is massive, and the largest convergence point of all is big enough to be seen from space. The container is finally lifted off the deck of the cargo ship. It descends into the immense machinery of Jebel Ali Port. This is the beating heart of the entire food security operation. Jebel Ali handles approximately 73% of all United Arab Emirates food and beverage trade by value. It is not merely a staging ground for steel boxes. It is a highly synchronized and heavily monitored ecosystem. As soon as the container touches the ground, it must be instantly connected to the power grid. The internal cooling system cannot be allowed to fail. Customs clearance data must process without errors. Health and safety inspections must be scheduled immediately. Transport trucks must align precisely with the exact moment of cargo release. Jebel Ali forces physical cargo, digital data, electrical power, and time itself to move together flawlessly. A massive logistics hub is not necessarily a fragile system, but when millions of tons of goods funnel into one single location, every paused minute becomes exponentially more expensive. The pressure is immense, but the port is designed to handle it. Yet, to truly understand the hidden vulnerability, you do not need to analyze the entire port facility. You only need to look closely at what is happening right now inside our single refrigerated container. Step inside the dark, insulated interior of the steel box. You will hear the low, constant hum of the compressor. Circulation fans push freezing air across pallets of sensitive produce. Temperature probes blink in the darkness, monitoring every slight fluctuation. Just inches away on the outside, the desert sun beats down on the metal. The thermal contrast is extreme. The machinery inside the box does not know that the cargo ship was forced to change its schedule. The organic food does not know that the necessary import permits are running late. Biology absolutely does not stop just because international logistics lose their predictability. This is a critical mechanism to understand. A logistical delay does not mean the food instantly rots. But every single hour of delay slowly consumes the safety margin. It reduces the number of processing options available to the distributor. It forces the refrigeration units to work longer and consume more power. It drives up the daily operational costs. Most importantly, it makes the next step in the distribution chain much harder to synchronize. If the delivery window is missed, warehouse schedules are thrown off balance. It changes how fresh the product will be when it finally reaches the consumer. This is exactly why a systemic food crisis does not begin with dramatic scenes of panic. It does not start with food suddenly vanishing into thin air. The first structural cracks happen quietly. inside cold steel boxes, as the invisible margin of time slowly runs out. The familiar image of a supply chain disaster is an empty supermarket, but that dramatic scene is usually the very last stage of a long failure. The first warnings are much more subtle and difficult to notice. Before a single shelf goes bare, the delivery schedules become highly unstable. Importers begin to notice the unpredictability and react defensively. They start ordering earlier and holding larger safety inventories. This sudden surge in demand puts immediate upward pressure on freight costs. Insurance premiums for maritime transport begin to climb. Energy costs to maintain these larger stockpiles rise significantly. On the consumer side, you might simply notice that certain specific brands are temporarily unavailable. You might see a slight change in the freshness of highly perishable goods. You might notice a gradual increase in prices across the board. These are the quiet symptoms of a logistics network fighting to maintain its balance under stress. An empty shelf is a possibility at the very end of this chain, but it is never a guaranteed result. The true crisis is the friction building up inside the delivery mechanism itself. The cost of maintaining abundance becomes heavier every day. When you see these hidden pressures, calling a desert city fragile seems like a logical assumption. It is easy to point at the sand and declare the system unsustainable. But calling Dubai fragile right now would be a completely unfair and inaccurate conclusion. A sensational doomsday narrative might conveniently skip this next part to keep the fear alive. We absolutely will not do that. Dubai did not walk into this global supply game empty-handed or unaware. The leadership has clearly seen these exact vulnerabilities and invested heavily to counter them. They operate Jebel Ali, one of the most capable and efficient logistics hubs on the planet. They maintain a vast and highly advanced cold chain infrastructure designed for extreme weather. The United Arab Emirates has enacted strict federal laws, specifically to regulate strategic food reserves. They possess immense financial purchasing power, allowing them to secure alternative contracts quickly. They are actively investing in domestic agricultural technology to reduce their baseline reliance on imports. In April 2026, they approved a national supply chain resilience program to constantly assess import risks, support local production, and diversify origins. These defenses are incredibly formidable, but you must understand exactly what they physically achieve. They do not magically teleport food across the ocean. Every single one of these defensive layers ultimately buys the exact same resource. They buy time. And extra time only has value if the fundamental systems of transport and energy remain fully functional. Let us run our first scenario. Imagine a single refrigerated shipment is severely delayed due to a localized storm. The other maritime routes are completely clear. The global energy supply is perfectly stable. Other international suppliers are shipping their products exactly on time. The local warehouses and distribution centers have plenty of available capacity. In this isolated event, Dubai does not collapse. The system barely even registers the shock. The strategic inventory absorbs the missing volume without any noticeable disruption to consumers. Logistics managers easily adjust the distribution schedule. Financial resources are instantly deployed to expedite a replacement order from a secondary market. The sheer handling capacity of the port easily processes the delayed cargo whenever it finally arrives. This proves a vital point. Dubai can absorb isolated shocks far better than the fragile desert city stereotype would suggest. The system is designed with enough buffer to handle standard logistical failures. It relies on its financial strength and infrastructural depth to patch these small holes immediately. But an isolated delay is the easiest test you can design. It assumes the rest of the global machine is working flawlessly to support the recovery. It tests only a fraction of the city's resilience. The real danger begins when the disruption scales up. What happens when the delayed ship is not an isolated incident? What happens when an entire major shipping route completely loses its predictability? For our second test, imagine a critical maritime corridor is choked off. Vessels are forced to wait at anchor or take massive detours around entire continents. The physical journey instantly becomes weeks longer. This creates a completely different kind of logistical pressure. The ships and the refrigerated containers are now held captive on the water for extended periods. The total number of ships in the world has not changed. The physical steel boxes still exist. But because they are stuck in transit, their useful capacity is entirely removed from the global network. They cannot be unloaded, cleaned, and sent back to pick up the next harvest. As journeys stretch out, vessels burn significantly more fuel, driving up operational expenses. Maritime insurance premiums skyrocket due to the increased risks and extended exposure. In this environment, temperature-sensitive cargo loses its flexibility compared to dry goods. You cannot simply park a load of fresh produce in the desert sun and wait for prices to drop. Meanwhile, multiple import-dependent nations start competing fiercely to secure whatever alternative transport capacity is left. The Food and Agriculture Organization has repeatedly warned about how disruptions in these vital Gulf routes transmit shocks outward. The impact spreads rapidly through food imports, fuel costs, energy markets, and even future agricultural yields due to delayed fertilizer shipments. This is a profound realization. A severe supply chain crisis often begins with a massive loss of effective capacity, long before there is an absolute shortage of food. The goods exist, but the mechanism to move them is suffocating. The sheer distance becomes a hostile force. The system is still functioning, but it is grinding against its own physical constraints. Now we reach the ultimate stress test. This is not a single delay, and it is not just a longer route. Imagine multiple systemic shocks happening simultaneously, all draining the exact same reserve of time. Watch how the chain reaction unfolds. A major maritime route is severely disrupted. This forces vessels into much longer geographical journeys, causing fuel consumption and insurance premiums to surge. Because ships and containers are tied up at sea, delivery schedules become highly erratic. Seeing this instability, some exporting nations panic and implement policies to protect their own domestic markets. They restrict exports, instantly shrinking the pool of available suppliers. Reacting to this tightening market, local distribution businesses in Dubai try to protect themselves by hoarding inventory. This aggressive buying pulls even more available capacity out of the cold storage network. Refrigerated freight stuck in transit loses its critical time margins, risking massive spoilage. Sensing the tension, consumers might begin to alter their buying behavior, pulling goods off shelves faster than normal. Notice how this crisis operates across three distinct layers. The first layer is logistics, where ships, ports, and cold storage facilities hit their physical limits. The second layer is the market, where prices surge, inventory is locked up, and defensive hoarding creates artificial scarcity. The third layer is future supply, where energy costs and delayed fertilizer shipments threaten the next planting season entirely. The true danger here is not that one single isolated link in the chain has permanently broken. The problem is that multiple essential links have started to degrade, and they are all burning through the city's limited buffer time simultaneously. The defense mechanisms are incredibly powerful, but they are suddenly forced to fight a war on three different fronts at once. The financial cost of simply keeping the lights on and the food cold becomes astronomical. Think about this complex mechanism carefully. Where do you believe the very first undeniable signal of this systemic failure would actually appear? Would it show up in soaring maritime shipping rates, in the overwhelmed capacity of cold storage warehouses, or in the sudden panic-buying behavior of the general public? I will not answer that immediately, because the reality reveals a much harder truth about wealth, infrastructure, and survival. This brings us to the ultimate boundary of financial power. There is a common belief that enough money can solve any logistical problem. But the physical world has strict rules. Money can easily pay the premium for a much longer shipping route. But money cannot physically shorten the geographical journey around a continent. Money can instantly buy food from an entirely new alternative supplier. But money cannot instantly grow a new harvest in the ground. Money can fund the construction of massive new cold storage facilities. But money cannot restore organic cargo that has already spoiled due to a broken temperature chain. Money can win aggressive international bidding wars for scarce resources. But money cannot order biology to slow down its natural decay. We have collided with the physical limits of the supply chain. These are the boundaries that wealth alone cannot cross. But hitting a limit does not automatically equal systemic failure. Calling this an apocalyptic scenario would be ignoring the deliberate actions the city is taking. Dubai knows it cannot rewrite the laws of biology or geography. Instead, the government is attempting to transform its financial wealth into something much more useful. They are aggressively converting money into a vast network of alternative options. They are trying to buy the one resource they actually need to survive. They are buying more time. The strategy is not to prevent the storm, but to ensure the city can outlast it. Let us examine how the system actively fights back. Dubai deploys a multi-layered counterattack against these vulnerabilities, but each solution comes with its own strict limitation. First, they enforce extreme diversity in their import sources. This adds hundreds of potential suppliers to the network. However, it does not guarantee that those new suppliers use completely independent maritime routes. Second, they mandate strategic food reserves by federal law. This effectively buys critical time for the population during a sudden shock. But a reserve is finite, and it cannot be stretched indefinitely. Third, they maintain massive cold storage networks. This protects temperature-sensitive goods from the brutal desert climate. Yet, these warehouses remain entirely dependent on a continuous supply of electricity and intense maintenance. Fourth, they rely on the sheer scale of Jebel Ali and its logistics infrastructure. This maximizes handling capacity and speed. But no single port can control the safety of the international waters thousands of miles away. Dubai is also building for the future. The Agri-Terminals project at Jebel Ali, with a massive investment, significantly boosts the ability to store and process essential grains, beans, and corn. But raw grains cannot replace every nutritional requirement or food group on the table. Furthermore, the ambitious Dubai Food District, announced to cover 29 million square feet, aims to integrate trade, processing, and distribution. But this is a phased development planning to start around 2027. It is an impressive future defense, not a fully active shield today. Finally, domestic agricultural production is expanding to reduce baseline reliance. But technology cannot instantly replace all necessary imports in a desert environment. This is my editorial view on their strategy. Dubai cannot completely erase the vast distances between continents, but they can build more options. They cannot prevent every global geopolitical shock, but they can absolutely prevent a single shock from spiraling into a fatal crisis. They are constructing a fortress of redundancy. Every new warehouse, every new trade agreement, and every new technological farm is another brick in that wall. It is time to issue a verdict on this massive logistical machine. How strong is Dubai, and where does its true fragility lie? We can break this down into three distinct levels. At level 1, we have a single isolated incident. Based on the evidence, Dubai has a remarkably high capacity to absorb this. Thanks to its giant port, diverse suppliers, and deep financial resources, a minor delay is easily handled. At level 2, we face a prolonged disruption of a critical trade route. In this scenario, the system continues to operate, but with heavy friction. Costs will inevitably rise. Highly perishable goods will face intense pressure, delivery schedules will lose predictability, and the sheer diversity of brands on the shelf might decrease. At level 3, we see the most dangerous test. Multiple simultaneous shocks place extreme pressure on all defensive layers at the exact same time. Transport, energy, supply availability, and market behavior all compound into a systemic threat. The final verdict is nuanced. Dubai is absolutely not an unprepared city waiting to collapse. It is also not an invincible fortress immune to the laws of physics. Its greatest strength lies in its massive number of alternative options. Its greatest vulnerability lies in the inescapable fact that all of those options must still operate within the same physical world. They share the same oceans, burn the same fuel, and are bound by the same relentless clock. The system is robust, but it can never be entirely disconnected from global volatility. Let us return to the refrigerated container from the beginning of our journey. Watch it leave the port, transfer to a truck, arrive at a distribution center, and finally end up as a meal on a table. This detailed investigation has proven that Dubai relies deeply on an imported food network of staggering global scale. However, there is absolutely no evidence to claim the city is running out of food. Dubai does not lack the financial ability to purchase what it needs. The true ongoing challenge is keeping time, temperature, energy, and physical transport moving in perfect synchronization. The real miracle is not that food simply appears in the middle of a desert. The miracle is that millions of complex global journeys finish on time, so perfectly that we completely forget they ever existed. And a system based entirely on constant motion is only strong as long as it continues to move. This video is for educational and analytical purposes. It explores systemic vulnerabilities using stress test scenarios and does not predict inevitable outcomes. Public data has limitations, and this analysis reflects current logistical mechanisms, not guaranteed future events. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe to the channel. Which link in the global supply chain do you believe is the most vulnerable? Share your perspective in the comments below.